Alrighty, so good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. In just a couple of seconds or minutes, we'll be having a feeding session here for our animals. If you'd like to learn and explore something new with me today, feel free to follow me at the end of our Trop Gallery. I will be wearing a red and white wig, and my name is Zulema, and I'm part of the education team here at the aquarium. We will be starting very, very shortly. Alrighty, and then for the duration of this presentation, we are gonna ask everyone to take a seat on the carpet. You're also welcome to stand behind the railing, but we wanna make sure that we have a great view of what we're gonna be seeing here today. Alrighty, so once again, thank you folks so much for joining me this afternoon. We will be having a feeding session here for our animals, and we will also be joined by Richard, a volunteer diver. And through him, we will get the opportunity to converse and talk a little bit more about what's happening within this exhibit. And before I am able to turn on his mic, we're gonna start talking a little bit more about this exhibit as a whole. So this is our tropical gallery, specifically our trop window. Within this exhibit, we have about 1,000 different individuals and over 100 different species of animals. Interestingly enough, this does replicate a real diving site off of Palau named Blue Corner. And even though it does replicate a real diving site, this only shows a small percentage of what a real coral reef ecosystem looks like. So we're gonna turn on his mic and see what's happening in there today. Alrighty, so how's it going in there?
Hey, Suleiman. Hello, all you amazing ocean explorers. Welcome to the Blue Corner. We've just transported you about 68,000 miles, 6,800 miles across the Western Pacific to the beautiful island of Palau and submerged you to this amazing tropical coral reef that you see behind me. This is a wonderful place to experience, and we're glad that you can come to the Scarium of the Pacific today and experience it with us.
And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to talk to you today. I do hear that we're going to be engaging in a feeding session. So could you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like in there?
That's right. All of these animals are pretty hungry right now. We've got a big, what we call the fish NATO behind me to my left, to your right. What that diver is doing, that's diver Ron. What he's doing is trying to distract a lot of these animals over here because we have targeted feed zones for some of our bigger animals. We have zebra sharks that are being fed from the surface over here. We have a giant grouper, Queensland grouper, that's going to be fed over by those tabletop corals. We have a southern stingray that's down at the bottom. She's going to be getting her own special feed. And what we're trying to do back here is make sure none of these animals, especially the blue and golden fin trevallies, from going over here and grabbing the food out from some of these other animals. So this keeps them distracted while we do some of our other feeds.
And I'm really glad that you described this process to us because out in their natural habitat, these animals are going to be relying a lot on these different adaptations that they have in order to find food and survive. Reason why for today's visit, I do highly encourage everyone here today to take a close look at where many of the mouths of these animals are located, as this positioning can definitely tell us a lot about what they're possibly eating as well as their lifestyles. So for today's feeding session, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these feeding strategies as well as many more. And in fact, why don't we start talking a little bit more about the stingrays in this exhibit? We have 3 different types of stingrays, and currently one right now is swimming at the far left corner, and it's gonna be our big white spotted eagle ray. That big stingray with the white spots on its back, once again, our white spotted eagle ray. Now, if we take a close look, it does seem that it has its mouth located on the underside. Now, could you tell us how animals having their mouth on the underside helps them out?
That's absolutely correct. Because it's on the underside, it kind of tells us that this is an animal that feeds on little critters that are at the bottom of the ocean in the sand and in the substrate. What they do is they actually have sensors in their nose. We all every living thing kind of has an electrical field that comes out their body, and they sense that in the water and are able to find animals that are beneath the substrate, the sand and the cobble that's in the bottom of the ocean, and they'll snatch those up and chew on those. And it's interesting, you'll see some of these rays as they swim by, you'll notice that there's little fish that swim underneath them. And those are basically because they're picking up the scraps that those rays are, as they chew, they're dropping little bits of food out of their mouth because they're very messy eaters. Because they eat clams and other creatures that have a hard shell, they don't have teeth as we know it. They have bony plates that they use to crush the shells with, and then they suck the meat out of them, and some of that meat comes out, and here comes one right here with a mono, just perfect timing. And so these other fish, in an almost symbiotic relationship, they'll swim with the rays and catch little pieces of food that come out of their mouth.
That is definitely right. And not only does this feeding strategy help them out, but our stingrays have other strategies as well. And in fact, if we all get the opportunity to touch our ears or our noses, that same material from which our ears and our nose are made out of, like Richard is demonstrating there, is made out of cartilage. Now, with cartilage, it allows our stingrays to gain that agility or flexibility to be swimming such gracefully in these waters. So now that we've gotten to explore a little on the stingrays, why don't we turn our attention to that big chaos or that fish tornado in the back? In there, as was described earlier, we can definitely see lots of different fish swimming and feeding there. Now, one of those fish might catch your attention as we might recognize them from a very famous movie, bright blue as well as yellow. These are going to be our blue and yellow tangs. Now, if we make close observations, we can definitely see that their mouths are located more towards the front. And that's because these fish are going to be known as grazers. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Absolutely. You see the coral behind us, they're actually colonies of animals that create a hard exterior skeleton, and they take the calcium from the ocean and they build up these structures. And they actually have algae that live inside of them. They're called zooxanthellae, and they have a symbiotic relationship with that algae, where that algae gives them certain kinds of nutrients because they convert the sunlight into sugars and carbohydrates and things like that. But there's also algae that grows on the outside of these corals. And what happens is these grazers, or these surgeonfish and some of the other species, will come along and eat that algae off the outside of the coral. And that helps clear the path of the sunlight for the zooxanthellae that live inside the coral polyps. So they're a very important part of that ecosystem, where all of the things work in perfect unison to keep the ecosystem healthy.
That is right. And I actually happened to hear a key phrase earlier, and that is going to be surgeonfish. So because they do fall under this family, they're also going to have another adaptation that's going to help them out fend for themselves in their natural habitat. And that's going to be related to the little spine that they have located towards the end of their tails. Now, unfortunately, it does look like we're not going to be able to get a great glimpse of that spine as of now, but once the presentation is over, if you have the chance or opportunity to get closer, then definitely look towards the end of these blue and yellow tangs' tails, as these spines are really prevalent. Now, what exactly is a spine used for?
Well, the spine is an actual adaptation of one of the scales on the fish's tail. It's very sharp, like a scalpel, a surgeon's scalpel, and that's where they get their name as surgeonfish. And they'll use that as a defensive mechanism. If an animal is swimming up to them from behind, they can whip that tail around and cause a lot of damage in the attacking fish. So it's actually very effective anti-predator adaptation. and that's where they get the name surgeonfish.
And I'm really happy that we get to hear a little bit more about this unique adaptation related to that family. So, as you've gotten the opportunity to notice, we've had the opportunity to talk a little bit about two different types of animals, but that doesn't mean that these are the only animals that rely on this coral reef ecosystem. Many of the other animals that are engaging in this feeding session also call this coral reef their home. And unfortunately, right now, corals are facing a major challenge that is making it hard for the lives of these animals as well as for us. Now, that big challenge is going to be related to climate change. So, whenever we burn fossil fuels like coal and natural gas for energy and transportation, we're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And this, as a result, is warming up the waters as well as the atmosphere. Now, let me tell you all a secret. Our corals, as well as many of the animals in here, like water temperatures that are just right. So not too cold, not too hot, but just right. And because of climate change, it's making things a little bit difficult for its inhabitants as well as for us. Now, before we get talking about what some of the solutions that we can do to help mitigate the effects of climate change are, why don't we talk a little bit more about why we should care for these coral reefs? Now, Richard, what benefits do our corals bring for the animals?
Well, this is a great place for them to breed, to live, find hiding places, and actually provides food. You know, it's interesting to note that coral reefs only represent about 1% of the ocean floor, but almost 25% of the ocean's life can be found in these critically important areas of the ocean, of the marine ecosystem. So it's really important for us to preserve them, and that's why places like Blue Corner were established to preserve these areas, kind of like Yosemite National Park, where people can't take the fish out and disrupt the ecosystem. But it is, as Zulema said, it's very important for us to do other things to help. These ecosystems, the coral in them, are tolerant to a very narrow range of temperatures. They like it about 80 degrees or so. And so when the ocean temperature rises, what happens is they start to expel those zooxanthellae that I was talking about earlier. And that leads to them turning white, which is called coral bleaching.
And then adding on to that, some of the benefits that corals bring to us human populations are in fact coastal protection. So if you do find yourself living along the coast and are amidst a strong storm, know that coral reefs do minimize the amount of damage that these strong waves or storms have upon coastal communities. Not to mention, coral reefs are currently being used in medical research to hopefully find cures for illnesses such as Alzheimer's disease as well as cancer. So the opportunities are endless with our corals. So now that we have explored a couple of different reasons why we should care about these corals, what are some of the solutions that are being done right now or can be done to help protect them?
Well, who thinks if you turn off one light bulb, that's going to solve the global climate warming issue? Anybody raise your hand if you think that's going to help? No, of course it's not. But think about it. If everyone in this room turns off one light bulb that you don't need to save some energy, then the collective impact of that is enormous. And then multiply that by everyone on the planet, and you begin to see how important it is to take little things like that into account and help us to preserve this planet that we have, the only planet that we have.
And I also do happen to hear that there are some amazing things that outside organizations as well as ours are doing right now. We are currently part of Seacorp International. And in fact, I do hear you have some more information that you could tell us about Seacorp.
Absolutely. It's very important for us to be able to preserve areas like this. And these corals that you see are very slow growing. They only grow about an inch or so a year. So when they die, it takes a long, long time for that to recover. So what organizations like the Scarium of the Pacific do is help seed the depleted coral reefs with new coral polyps to help restore the coral. And through the programs like Secor, which you can see off to your left, we are actually growing coral polyps and then taking those to areas that need them and outplanting them to restore those ecosystems.
And last but not least, you are already taking the first step right now. Believe it or not, just by being here, learning, exploring, sharing, and taking this information with you, with your friends, family, and community, all of that can definitely go a long way. That being said, I want to thank everyone for sticking around, learning, exploring. The aquarium is celebrating 25 years since opening, and none of the amazing conservation efforts that are being done inside and outside these walls would be possible without you. Know that your membership, your ticket, or that cute otter plushie that you're thinking of buying or have already bought, all that money goes directly into taking care of these animals and once again supporting these amazing conservation efforts. Last but not least, I would like to take the time to thank our volunteer divers in there. Why don't we give them a big round of applause for all the hard work that they do? And before we close the conversation, I'd actually like to ask you, Richard, why do you choose to volunteer here with us?
It's an amazing experience. I get to come here every week, dive in this beautiful aquarium with all of these amazing animals. And as Batman says, it's not who we are, but what we do that defines us. So each one of you have an opportunity now to take what you've learned here and turn that into action and become a doer. And if everybody would think about the ocean ecosystem, think about ways that you could help save the planet, then you could be a superhero.
There we go. And that being said, I do hear that you're going to be sticking around for pictures and maybe a game of rock, paper, scissors. Is that right?
I'd love to do that, so come up to the window.
Alrighty, so you heard Richard.
Catfish friends.
You heard Richard. If you'd like to take a picture with Batman himself, feel free to go up to the window. I'll be turning off the mic very shortly, but thank you, folks, and have a great rest of your time here at Scarium of the Pacific.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.